listener production.
The creators of this podcast would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which it is recorded. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first storytellers of this land. We pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, as well as any Indigenous people who may be listening today.
Even things like guys, like to me, guys is like not gendered. Like,
yeah, I know. It's so funny. I find it interesting. Okay, let's start. Everyone relax. This is TOFOP with friends. I'm Wil Anderson. Rhys Nicholson's here. We've already started chatting, so we might as well just talk about it. And we were talking about gendered language. And I'm really conscious about, the idea of trying to refer to people in, with the pronouns they prefer, or like to not use, like the big one for me is ableist language. Like it's just so ingrained as part of our culture to use like mad and insane or psycho or whatever these things might be.
Even like dumb, like through the process of editing the book, it was like, obviously the publisher wants to kind of future-proof the book as well. And there's recipes, and a lot of the recipes were called like, roast chicken for dum-dums. And they kind of had to be like, it's not the worst thing you could say, but there is not a great connection to that. And you can change it or you don't have to change it. It's completely up to you. But like dum-dums maybe isn't great for some people. And it's like, oh yeah. Like it was just interesting having someone go through your work and go like, this is a thing that you say that maybe isn't right and in 10 years will absolutely not be right anymore.
Well, that's part of that conversation, isn't it? Like when we have these people who hold on to, because in your book it serves a purpose in that you introduce early in the book the idea that you like the for dummies range of things, and therefore it feels like it's a callback to a pre-existing piece of literature that you are literature. I call the for dummies.
Yes. Do they still make them? They must.
I mean, I wonder if they have changed. Like, is there any chance that the for dummies,
that's a big meeting for those guys. Right? Like, guys, we've got to rethink the whole. It's like I always think about and this is such an old thought, but like the first day of COVID and just the meeting they had to have on Zoom at Corona, like just the how are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? Like, are people going to, like, just having to rechange your entire brand because of something that's happened?
Well, so the for dummies, by the way, still exist, still proudly. Like, what I will say is when I'm looking at the images that I can see on here, they highlight what the thing is. So it's very much football for dummies.
For dummies.
Right?
Yeah.
Calculus for dummies. So I think the for dummies has been...
The internet for dummies, which is just the internet now.
So when it comes to terms and, like the confusion of, because also I wrestle with the idea of being like, I'm 50 in January. Like I'm a man of a certain age. Like I'm a white, straight-ish, Australian man of my generation and age and industry as well, right? Like because there's also that thing in our industry where there is a certain type of comedian, and this is not an Australian specific problem. In fact, it probably happens more internationally than it does in Australia at this point, but becoming a, middle-aged white man who thinks that everything was better in the olden days and can't understand and what happened to the larrikin and you can't say anything anymore. Why can't I make my racist?
Why don't I get
sexist?
booked at the store anymore? Yeah. Well, heaps of reasons.
And by the way, there's still a few people getting booked there who shouldn't be. So you're behind them.
Yeah. Oh, I like seeing, and look, there's plenty of gigs in Brisbane still for you. But then I think you, and look, I'm not saying this to suck your dick. You are someone though that I think has ridden that pretty perfectly. Like I think is kind of the perfect career trajectory for that, because like when I was like a teenager and you were like on the Glass House and stuff, you were like the young guy, like you were like the cool new young, like, and look, he's got painted nails and stuff. And as you've kind of gotten older, and I think it's like a thing that we all kind of yearn for, I think by you, all the work you make is interested. Like, you are a constantly interested person, which I think is what those other people don't. And I think it's like, I was having a conversation with someone the other day about being a comedian is being relevant. It is all about being relevant, like how you need to understand kind of what's going on to be able to make a comment about it, and you need to have someone to relate to. And if at a certain point you decide you are the relevant thing instead of being relevant, do you know what I mean? Like you shut yourself off.
I'd never thought of it like that, but that makes a lot of sense the way you framed it, because I was talking to Gillian Cosgrove about this idea of, that all her shows have a question at the heart of them. Like, they're not an answer. They're a big question that they're asking, right? And I do think that there is a point in maybe the evolution of some like public people where they decide they are the answer.
Yeah.
And that isn't relevant just to comedy. That's relevant across the board.
Some of them get $200 million radio contracts.
So it is this thing where we are constantly in this world where language changes, and that you've got to accept the idea that something you say now, it might age badly. There might be something in the book. And so this is where the book brings us back to the book. Rhys has written a book called Dish. It's fantastic. I bought a copy, so I don't even have. Well, they offered to send me a PDF, Rhys, for the chat, as they tend to do, doing their job as publicists. But I like to hold a book in my hands when I'm reading it. So I held your book in my hands and I read it from front cover to back cover. It's super entertaining. It's so well written. It's broken up in a really in a way that really kind of keeps the momentum right through I think that you've done a really smart thing in that when I think about your comedy style, and, what I admire about it the most is that you just have, I like people who are able to make interesting work, but also want to tell a heap of jokes on the way. I feel like that's what stand-up comedy offers you the opportunity to do that, say, other art forms where you can express those same things can offer you. And they can offer you different things. But what stand-up specifically offers you is that you can talk about whatever you want in whatever way you want to talk about it, but you get to be funny along the way. So there's a lot of punchlines in your work, right? They're punchline dense.
I'm obsessed with momentum, I think.
Yeah. So then you sit down to write a book. Well, rather than me telling you what I think first, then let you ask you about your process. So when you sit down to write a book like Dish, and you know that you can't sustain a stand-up 1 hour, let's say, do you know how many words an hour show of yours would be?
Oh, I mean, too many probably. I'm one of those people that I've never really I've only ever had to write down my stand-up for I remember I had to do it once. I did a job years ago for the BBC. I did a special for them, and I shouldn't have been. I was too early doors, and I had to send them a transcript of the entire show. And what a harrowing experience that was to send off a Word document to some lawyer in the UK to be like, by the way, this is what I think comedy is. I'd imagine they would be. I mean, how many? What they reckon 500 words is 5 minutes on a. Does that make no? That doesn't make any sense.
My guess is that your hour shows probably go for about 7,000 to 8,000 words on a page.
Yeah,
I reckon
that's too many words.
So, but a book is 10 times that. I guess this is the only maths I really need to get to for the sake of what I wanted to ask.
You don't want to go more into the weeds about the maths? All right.
I mean,
okay, sure.
Absolutely do. Of course I do. This is the thing that I am most interested in, but I am aware that people are also listening to this for entertainment. So I'm going to ask this. When it comes to momentum, you can't sustain that sort of momentum for when I was writing my book about the pandemic, it did have a little of that momentum in it, but the reason it did was it was meant to feel like that. It was meant to feel like a panic attack that somebody had put on page. That was what I was going for. It was how I felt about the times I was writing about, but that's not what Dish is. Dish is a more considered look at your life, and it's a comedy book, and it's a series of essays essentially, but it's an autobiographical series of essays. You're dropping into different important stages in your life, and constructing those stories in the way that you might tell that story on stage, or at least an extrapolation of the way you might, jokes and structure and, like introducing ideas and leading to conclusions and all those sort of things. But in between, you've broken that up. So talk to me about how you, like, how did you decide on what a momentum of like a book that's 10 times what a show would normally be? How do you just work that out?
I think I tried to because, it's my first try at something like this. And it turns out when you get a book deal, no one kind of talks to you again. I had an incredible editor, Clive, who was there along the way to give advice and stuff like that. But there's no hand holding. There's no they're Penguin Random House. They got some other stuff on. And so I kind of was left to my own devices a little bit. And I just tried to approach it, I think, the way that I approach my shows, which is I do not write in order. My husband, Kyron, directs my shows with me and helps me put them together. And I just write and perform it. And then we sit back and try and build the momentum in post almost. Kind of go, well, this bit's really working. It's almost and I feel like this isn't the most impressive answer, but it was purely I just wrote at times at 2 a.m. on a Dexy to fill a word count. And then in the edit, I got obsessed. And then, look, it's good to have lots of friends around being diagnosed as you wait for your own diagnosis. And then we... and then we put it together literally with Post-its. I just looked at it and just thought, I think I wanted it because, it is a comedy book. I wanted to make it almost easy for myself giving this the first go and not try and do anything. I think I've done it in the past with stand-up shows where I've tried to tackle something that I was not able to, is this grand idea, and then you actually get going, you're like, ooh, maybe I'm not equipped with the skills. But then I realized if I set it up really simple, that was this is just a book of essays and it's going to have some recipes in it. It gave me freedom within there to make it there's some of them are super autobiographical. Some of them are just my ideas on anchovies and eggs. And then some of them are I'd never written satire before, and I wanted to write. There's an essay about how there's a essentially Illuminati of gay people trying to destroy straight white men, and I just wanted to give myself little projects almost, which is kind of what I do with stand up. I think if you look at my material, I try and do little in the early days it used to be I think I want to be able to do a bit like Maria Bamford would do. And it's taking, the kind of, not a style of, not the way that someone does something, but the kind of ethos of something. And then I would be and maybe I want to do a kind of Paul F. Tompkins kind of style. And then maybe I want to do, and, slowly kind of developing a voice over 10, 15 years by doing that until you develop your own. And I think it's I wanted to try and, I really love David Sedaris. And I was I want to try and write it. All I wanted to do was be able to write a book that if you're reading it, there's a chance you might giggle to yourself on the train. And that was the momentum for me. I wanted it to read funny for most of the time.
Well, it does. It's funny. It's a funny book. It's a genuine laugh out loud book, and there are things that are in there specifically for the purposes of comedy, which kind of differentiates it from a funny autobiography to being this is the purpose of this piece is mostly to make you laugh. And whereas,
then very occasionally, I think I've learned from some jobs I've had recently, being on The Weekly or those types of shows, allowing myself to also at the end, and I think it's kind of what you need to do in these types of books, is either finish with it's same with a show, finish with a strong punchline, a callback or something, or finish with it's that kind of, I think Jon Stewart almost invented the modern version of it, of that look down the barrel of the camera, jokes. But this is why we really need to be fucking worried about this thing. And John Oliver does it perfectly now. I'm not talking about newsy stuff. I don't have the brain for that. But being able to, make a bunch of jokes about Drag Race and my upbringing in a queer, happy house, but then also being able to, at the end, be but also here's a bunch of reasons of why it's fucked, and here's a bunch of like reasons of why we need to be doing more in this. And I tried to talk about legalizing weed as well, and like that, like just if there was a way that felt right, because I know I don't have yet, I don't think, the kind of creative stamina to create a work in a book that is like, I even say I wrote the back blurb almost first to be like, give myself a kind of, to be kind of like, this book is not going to change your life. And I think that is my comfort zone, is like, if I think it's a thing where a lot of comics do it sometimes, where we, especially when we're younger, we try and be, these people that we admire, we think that they just landed the way that they are. Does that make sense? Like, and so we yearn to be like, well, I'm going to do, like, my first sets and some of the first things I wrote that didn't end up in the book were like these wild kind of like, I was obsessed with Sarah Silverman, like original Sarah Silverman, like, and when I was first an open micer, and so I wrote a bunch of jokes about the AIDS crisis and like things like that, because you're just not equipped. And I just wanted to make it easy for it took me a long time to answer this question, but with the book, I wanted to make it as easy as possible for my first kind of go at it.
But by the way, we don't have to rush through it. You can take as much time as you want to.
Yeah, I know. I just realized I was questions. Like, when you find yourself kind of in like a circle, you're like, which reminds me a lot. Like, I learn't the process of editing, like, to come back to your question about how do I go about the momentum of it, there was a lot of failure of like, I think in stand-up, you can have a great idea and it might last for 2 minutes, but then it kind of develops into 20 minutes one day or something. In a book, sometimes I'd be like, start real strong and I'd be like, oh, this is going to be such a fucking funny 5,000 word thing. And then at about 1,500 words, you're like, and we are running out of steam. With this, there is no way to land this plane, and so I've got to and then so many of them actually just became a 200-word paragraph in another essay.
So one of the things you talked about is this book's not going to change your life, but I guess it depends on what your parameters of changing someone's life is, right? So like I often say of comedy that I'm cynical about the idea of it can change anybody's mind about anything, right? Like, but that's disingenuous as well. What I'm cynical about is people who think they know how they can change people's minds. That's what I am skeptical of. Like, comedy changes my mind all the time. Like, I've been hugely influenced in a myriad of ways by things that I've seen at comedy shows. The most famous example I always like to go to, because it's just a very practical one that isn't like, it's tangible. I saw Paul F. Tompkins do a routine about going to see Prince in LA that made me go and buy a ticket to Prince in LA. Like, that routine was so good, I spent $500 on a ticket to Prince. Like, you know what I mean?
And like, Paul F. Tompkins is like one of my ones, and I think he would also be someone that, and I've talked about him a lot, and I reckon it's gotten back. Like, I've met him 2 times, and he was so lovely to me, but definitely in that way that, when you meet a fan that you're like, oh, I've seen you on Twitter, and I know that you have an intense love for me, and I'm going to be very polite and ask very direct questions, and we're going to finish this interaction as soon as possible. But he is one of those ones that I think he would be the same in that he does not think his comedy changes people's lives, but it absolutely changed mine in that the way that he structured jokes and the way that the things that he would talk about, similar to Maria Bamford, made me go like, oh, there's like this whole, because when we first are coming up, you're like, this is what stand-up is. And it's like, whatever you saw when you're a kid, that is what stand-up is, and that is what stand-up will be forever. And then you see someone like Paul F., and you're like, oh, it can be like anything. And it can be like dumb or weird, but it can be quite like, there's a genuineness. I think it's like, and it's something that I've tried to do, I think is, there's a character there, but I think comics that you can see genuine kindness in, like through their work, if that makes sense. Like, you know that they're not climbers because they've made some weird choices in their careers, and I think I try and do that with like, and yeah, same with with the book. I wanted it to be a bit, like I wanted it to read well, but I wanted it to be a bit, not like is this a cooking book or is this a memoir or what is this? And there's people like Amy Sedaris and these kind of people that really meld different kind of genres together. And, you know, I think I do pretty straight stand-up, for lack of a better term. pardon the pun. But my stand-up is very kind of...
I find your stand-up appropriation of my culture.
Yeah. Wow, what a thing to get cancelled for.
I know.
Finally. But I think I'm really interested at the moment in, you know, I'm still, you know, I'm only 33, but I've been doing stand-up a very particular way for, like, you know, in a few years it'll be half my life. And the book was like I was really daunted by it and really scared by it, but it was like a fun new way to like, I can like stretch my legs with it a little bit more as well. Like I can do the punchlines and stuff, but there is a bit of room where I've tried to talk about. Years ago, I tried to write a show about having an eating disorder, and it turns out it's pretty tough, especially when you're like 25 and not an incredible comedian yet. It made more sense to be able to talk about those types of things in a book because you're giving people the choice to stop reading and have a think for a minute, or like, and I can chuck pretty full on ideas at them. Like, you know, I remember there's some jokes in the book about where, yeah, I went on Jen Fran's show The Feed and kept bringing up how funny I thought it was that I was talking about my eating disorder on a show called The Feed. That never got a laugh in an audience one time. But I always thought it was pretty funny. But in a book, you're able to kind of give it more context and more kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a control there, but it also, I think you're giving the audience who are reading it, you know that like it's hard for somebody to step out of the room like I've got a piece about that I have not done in a show, like, but it's based on a true thing that I did, which was like that I went through a period of like death ideation, like, and I want to be able to talk about that because I think it's different to like suicidal tendencies, and I think it's something no one ever really talks about. And I had this like true story about the fact that I said, because I wouldn't kill myself, and again, trigger warning for people, like I'm going to talk about this, but I wouldn't kill myself. And the main reason, honestly, is that, like, you know, for my family and stuff, like I wouldn't want to, like, you know, that's like, it's not actually for myself, it's for my family and stuff. And so one day I Googled the most dangerous places to go on holiday because I thought, you know what? I can just like have like that. No one will feel sad about that, right? You know what I mean? Like that'd be like, look at him. He'd venture it to the last moment, you know, like, and then that way, like, you know, and so I think like comedically, I'd love to be able to like talk about that because it is real. But every time I've even attempted it, people, it's just and I feel it as well because I don't want to be in a room where there's someone there who doesn't want to be hearing about that in that moment. Whereas if in your book, people have that choice in that moment. If it's not right now that I can hear you talk about eating disorder because I myself have one, or I can't hear you talk about this other issue because that's something that's troubling me right now, I can put it down. I can skip through. I can go to the next thing and read that instead. And I think that giving your audience permission to like consume it in that way, there's something that probably means that you can talk about some other things because of that.
And I think that so perfectly sums up that fucking thing about like, you can't say anything anymore. How, you can say anything as long as it's right. Like I did a benefit gig the other night for Eating Disorders Victoria, who are this like incredible charity. And the room was full of either, you know, there was like sponsor and stuff, but there was either people that have suffered, people that work in mental health and like just medical kind of staff and stuff. And I made a couple kind of like passing jokes about stuff. And it was like the perfect place to talk about that and make some pretty dark jokes about it because they are the people that are ready to hear about it and they are the people that are ready to laugh about it. Whereas I always find it really interesting that the people that might say in a stand-up show don't want to hear about it, are often also not the people. They might know someone, and it's for the right, it's the right reaction. But like, oh, my sister has an eating disorder, or like, oh, my sister's had death ideology problems and blah blah. And so that offends me that I don't want to hear it. And it's like, but the people that have actually often gone through it are the ones that are like, let's fucking talk about this, please. Jesus Christ. Like,
man, the other night I was in Wynnum at the Wynnum Fringe Festival. It's a new Fringe Festival, but it's really great. And I had a great old time doing my improvised show in a big old tent with 570 people there. And it was like a local town meeting. Wow. Everyone knew each other and it was fun. But in the front couple of rows, the wheelchair accessible rows are the first few rows in the tent. And there was a whole bunch of people in chairs and differently abled who were there with like carers. There was a whole group of people who come out. And I love that. I want everyone to be able to, like, I want my, comedy to be accessible to everybody. But afterwards, I was just having a chat to one of the guys who was in a chair and he goes, I wish you'd, spoken to me. And he said, I would have been all right with it. And I said, I'd never have a doubt that you would have been all right with it. And everyone in those front two rows, everyone there would have been all right with it. My worry was everyone else. Yeah. It wasn't me or you. Yeah. Like, I think we would have been fine. We would have found a way of humor and kindness with each other that would have been a very good old vibe. But the minute I venture there with a room full of people I don't know, I just don't know where that's going to necessarily land, right?
It's such a funny, like, there's a whole thing about agency there. Like, the people in the room would be uncomfortable because no matter what you were saying, they would be pretty certain you were picking on this man in a wheelchair. Whereas, like, I mean, I don't know if you've gigged with Steady Eddie recently. That is the meanest, fastest man I've ever met in my entire life. And like, he's a real reference, but like, to bring up on this podcast. But Steady Eddie. I've done, a few years ago, I did a cruise ship with him, and there's something incredible. Sorry, I'll just pick up that name I've dropped. There are two names I've dropped: Cruise Ships and Steady Eddie. I mean, he
must have done a joke about like actually being steady on the high seas, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There must
be
a whole bit about, okay.
And there was a point where we were all on stage together, all the comics, and they do these kind of chat things. And he was, by the end of 4 days out there, we're like on stage just being harsh to each other, like, and I made some joke about how he made some joke about us sleeping together, and I made some joke about like, well, I'll obviously beat you back to the room or something, like whatever it was. And we were laughing, the comics were laughing, a few people, and then the rest of the audience is like, is one of these people homophobic and one of these people ableist? And I don't know how to compute this.
Yeah.
But then luckily, the audience of a cruise ship, there's just enough people who were laughing for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
so
that's
okay.
right. So just to keep the momentum going. We'll take you tonight just to get us through to the next bit. But I was going to say, like, about the idea of like books making a change. I often think that you never know what way it's going to be, right? So I was doing a show, and it was all about climate change, during the pandemic and the floods up north. And I had this couple come up to me and
just a theory, by the way. No.
They say, look, here's some stuff. We've done our own research. No, they talked about the show as a way that they'd opened a conversation with their son. Like that, there wasn't like, hey, we've changed everyone's mind and blah, blah, blah. But we were able to use like the show as a way to open a conversation we weren't able to have with him. And you sometimes don't know when those little moments are to reconnect, those conversations or whatever it might be. But also, like sometimes, so this week, like since I've read your book, I have, you speak about, and this is a story that I know about you because obviously I was around during these times, your connection through family to the band Machine Gun Fellatio.
Yeah.
And you just referenced a couple of the songs and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back and I haven't listened to Unsent Letter for like 20 years, right? And I reckon I've listened to it like half a dozen times this week. It's a great song.
And I talk about it as much, like write an essay about my uncle who like is very important to me and kind of was that person in my family that that everyone should have in their family and the rest of my aunts and uncles I'm also very close with in there, but he was like the youngest
he was
by a long shot.
Young and in show business and
like
messy
and would turn up to Christmases and was, essentially at the kids' table. And he was in this band Machine Gun Fellatio, and so a lot of my kind of by the time he'd moved back to Newcastle and was working in TV and stuff, I was old enough to like, I needed someone to kind of give me a bit of purpose, I think, or at least, and you would have had this as well, like, you know, you grew up in a, like, Newcastle, very different to where you grew up, but like, you know that you have this thing, you're like, I feel like I might have something to offer, but I do not know where to point that. And Glenn was this incredible person to like, just help me focus it a little bit more, and just, but also like, and you know, the kind of work that they made, I think there's a little bit of that in me as well, where it's like, it's pop. They made pop, but it was like pretty dirty pop. I mean, not, you know, later in their kind of careers,
but
it was kind
dirty, experimental, arty, all those sort of things, like provocative, but like also pop.
And like the lyrics are, they, you know, I think they always kind of say there were 7 members of the band and they were all lead singers and they were all writers. And I think that might have been the downfall. And methamphetamines. But their last album was called Machine Gun Fellatio on Ice. Need I say more? But they did have this kind of thing that really, when you would go to their shows, it was an experience, and it was like it was rough show business, but it was, you know, to the point where I worry about, I'm one of those people that I do a sound check, like I want the lighting to be right and I want like the room to look right, because I think when you're coming to a show, there should be some level, this is my solo show I'm talking about, there should be some level of like experience to it. And with the book, I was the same. Like I was very like the cover, I designed the cover and I designed the font and that sort of, and I was very involved in the layout, because I think like when you're putting out work like that, you should, every part of it should, you know, when you see during comedy festivals, someone's poster that you're like, I reckon that act has never seen that poster before. Like they had nothing to do with this. And to me, that's the details. That's the little, your tentacles should be in everything, I think.
Well, okay, I do agree to a certain like point, but like, how do you not get lost in the details and forget about the, like, because there is
very easily,
famously there's the like what you're saying is there's the opposite style of comedian who's done a lot of work on their poster and their, you know, pre-show playlist and the way the room looks, and possibly should have just taken a pass or two at the actual show itself.
Yeah. So, and I've been that person luckily, I've always had really great posters, and for a good 5 to 7 years had very bad shows. And now luckily, finally, I think we're just getting to the point where they're coming up to match. But yeah, no, I agree. Like I used to make merch. I used to make bow ties to sell after shows, because I thought that was quite funny. The hours I put into making enough bow ties to sell to the audience when I should have been writing a joke from time to time. Yeah, I agree. And I think even, and I imagine you would understand this more than anyone, it's such a privileged problem, but I'd be really interested, and I'll ask you something. Like when you start getting busy, it is so, and you're getting more and more kind of offered, like I'm in this very nice time in my career at the moment where things are like heating up and it's nice. And as I was saying to someone the other day, like the rooms are getting bigger, but I know at a certain point they will start getting smaller again.
Mm-hmm. I can tell you when that happened for me.
where the agents are like, you know, we're thinking at a more of an intimate tour this year. What do you think? What
about a half run? Do you need to do the whole?
But it is like, and I think it's about acknowledging that, like, and knowing that that's going to happen at some point. But what's interesting to me is the kind of, I'm a pretty hard worker, and but it gets to a point where you start worrying, like, you know, I've got a show, I'm going to do a tour next year, and it's like the dates are booked in and and I've started working on it, but you start like, it's that managing thing and like that kind of wanting the work to still be really good all the time. And I think we all know stories of people where when they got bigger and busy, the work started to suffer because they're doing a corporate every weekend and they're doing blah, blah, blah every weekend.
So I'm interested, like people who listen to, or like hopefully there's people here for the first time. Welcome. Thanks for coming to the show. But or Wilcom because I'm a branding guy, but I'm not really, but it is convenient. And it means that like it actually speaks to what we're talking about, which is this idea of because I've done, I don't know, 27 or 28 shows. I can't actually remember how many it is, but there's a lot of them. Often they need to be the poster and the name and all the blurb all have to be done well before I've kind of conceived what the show itself will be. And so it's been quite convenient for me to just like, I knock that away, that all gets done, and then I can concentrate. And I've also streamlined some of that stuff into a sense that I have a style, like so that in regard to like how my shows are presented, like James Fosdike's been doing my artwork for like 12 years or whatever it's been, like the backdrop is always the poster without me in it. Like there are certain things that are like the way that it is done is like we just kind
processes.
Yeah, like so it's a version of that same thing. And I like consistency. That's actually one of the things that because then it gives me a freedom within it creatively for the show. I'm not locked into the name being reflective of what's in the show. Like I don't care if it just says this is a new show, right?
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. I wanted to call my show this year More of the Same. But I decided to change my mind about that. But I think I agree with consistency. Like I think I hope that people can come to my shows and just know they're going to see like 55 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes of like, it'll be fun and I'm going to be funny the whole time and there's going to be lots of punchlines. That's all you need to know. Have fun. Yeah. Bye.
So then the next step, which is the one that you're talking about, which is how you allocate your creative time, that's more interesting to me to talk about because like people who listen to a whole bunch of my podcasts will know that my constant question that I ask myself, and I ask myself it out loud on this podcast and have been asking it of myself on this podcast for years. And I am sure that people are sick of me asking myself this question, but I ask it regardless, which is, I've never been a full-time professional stand-up comedian since I was 24 years old. Like, and I wouldn't have really classified myself as being a professional full-time stand-up comedian at 24 really, but that was the last time. Ever since then, I have had TV, radio, book, whatever, like all these other things that have occupied my time, and I've never just got to go, okay, like this year, all I have to worry about is write a stand-up show and do it. So look, firstly, you can find a way, you can find the time.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't think, I've been, I've had full-time radio and TV and all sorts of things and done shows. Like, does it affect the quality of them? Like, I think the biggest hurdle is the show a creative escape from the other thing, or is it using more of the thing that is that isn't an infinite resource? Like if in your other job you are using a lot of your creativity, like that's why I find breakfast radio I've always found really hard to combine with stand-up. It's not just the hours, it's the fact that like I'm using like the last thing my brain wants to do when I go home from breakfast radio is
have an opinion.
Yeah, right? Yeah. What's your take on something? Or to even identify, like in one whole stand-up show, I might have like 3 opinions. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, whereas like in a morning of breakfast radio, you might have a dozen. Like, so it's even that, it's exhausting, right? And whereas if you're doing some other project that has nothing to do with your stand-up, I often find that your stand-up actually can flourish in that environment because like stand-up almost feels like a relief or like
it's almost like a reaction to it.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of, I think that's
it
kind of
it gives you a freedom.
Like for the first time in a while, I don't know if this is boring, but like the show that I did last year, I did a return season this year. And so it's now been 2 years almost of doing the same show. And it's great, sure. But like, I think usually this time of year I would be dreading putting together a new show. Not dreading, but kind of like I would have just finished a tour and then the show dies. You bury it in a shallow grave and then you move on to the next one. Like, whereas I've had this extra year to kind of be the idea of doing new material, you know, that kind of, and you're in it right now, you're doing these like improv shows, the idea of that bit after you're writing, like you're coming up with ideas and that sort of thing, and then there's that bit in the middle before your eyes go dead with material that you're like flying with it. It's like still a bit mucky and a bit messy, but it's like it's kind of there. I like cannot wait for that. I cannot wait for that part of the creative process. And I think I didn't get that. Like the book was that last year, but you don't get the crackle with the book. You don't get you hear the whoosh of an email leaving, and then you're like, here we go. That's another chapter done. Like, I think that's what I really enjoyed putting the book together, but it was draining in a kind of different way. Like you don't get, the feedback you get is from a man called Clive, which by the way, has the same name as my father-in-law. So getting emails of feedback from a man with my father-in-law's name was a lot, like just like, oh, got some thoughts, do you, Clive? But did you read your book? Is there an audio book? Yes. And that was
what a horrible experience that is.
Oh my God.
Did you work off the manuscript that's in the book? And if there were, say, a couple of words that were misspelled, and they'd come, maybe a nothing when you meant noting when you meant nothing, or something like that.
Oh, there are loads of turns out there are loads of typos in my book. I don't know how.
There's a few.
Yeah, which I don't know what I'm meant to do about that. I've told them they've done a reprint of it as well, but I'm like, Jesus Christ, guys.
They're mostly ones that wouldn't have got spotted because the word that's misspelled became another word, like a nothing to a noting, or like those sort of things. Just a couple where you're like, oh yeah, an autocorrect that went wrong. That's
And I did notice them a lot. Like we went through when we were reading the audiobook and went through and noticed, or even just like realizing, like, because there's recipes in there, as I was reading through the recipe going, wait, this doesn't make any, that measurement's different than it was up there. Like, am I gonna poison someone? Oh, because because there's recipes in it, part of the book contract was in big bold letters it said you cannot put in recipes for poison or a bomb. It's like, geez, like that's in there because someone's tried to put a recipe for a bomb in there one time. Reading it was a harrowing experience because I made them. It's 5 days of 4-hour sessions of reading it, and I made the mistake on the first day of doing it with gusto, and then you've got to match that energy for the next 4 fucking days. Fucking hell. And just losing interest in yourself so quickly. So it's like, I think it's the same with like, and if this is too inside baseball, that's fine, but how involved, say you've done a special, are you involved pretty heavily in that edit?
No.
Yeah, see, I am. And I always go into it with gusto, and then by edit 4, I'm like, can we just cancel this? I fucking hate this. There's not one funny thing in this whole thing.
I've seen my Will Logical, which is on the ABC, I've seen once. Because I had to cut 10 minutes out of it, so I had to watch it to decide which 10. It was an easy cut. It was fine. Yeah. Should have done it while I was actually fucking touring the show. It would have made a better show. But
isn't that the thing? I quite like owning things for that reason of like, and we were talking about kind of future-proofing things and like, language changing and stuff. I did like my first proper little special that was on the ABC years ago, and then we got it back, and every now and then, like, I don't know, like Channel 10 buys it for like a shilling and a chicken every couple of years, and it doesn't even really make any sense. It's a show about marriage equality. I don't know why Channel 10 keeps buying it. This doesn't make any sense anymore. But we were able, by still owning it, I'm able to there was a chunk in it that just didn't feel right anymore, and it's like, well, I'm going to take that little. It's get over the years. It's going to get to the point where it's just like a 5-minute special that no one can.
Here's what's left.
Yeah, that'll be the name of my last show, I think. Here's what's left.
I love that though, what you're saying, because I think that what you're doing, being involved in the edit, I think that's actually like it's following the project right through to its natural conclusion, and that makes a lot of sense. But this is why I've never been like I've made a career, like I've got a television career. There's like no doubt about that, but I'm not a television person. And part of the reason is that I don't ever really consider anything that I do to be television. What I consider myself to do is put on a live show in front of an audience.
Yeah.
Like I make a show and we film it all. And that hour that we film on the night, that's the show that I made. Like and then with what I've provided, like, I mean, I go into a paper edit and like we talk about what should stay in, stay out. But after that, I don't watch the show. Like I probably haven't seen 75% of the stuff that I've made. Like, you know, occasionally I have to check in for reasons, but if I don't need to, I don't watch. Like it always remains in my head what we recorded on a Tuesday night. My kind of part of it's done. And it's the same with my stand-up shows. Like if I record those, I'm like, well, I've recorded it. I can't edit jokes in, so we can decide what to take out. But other than that,
I think that's how it fucking should be, right? Like I think as a TV consumer, I came up in like, you know, I was watching TV in the 90s and into the 2000s and stuff. And, you know, that kind of era of, in Australia, like Good News Week and that, and like the, you know, for this producer called Ted Robinson who made a lot of those shows. And it was chaos. There was chaos kind of like coming off the screen. And I think, you know, like the Glass House is the same, you know, it's almost the same set.
I think it was parts of the same set. I think you're fine.
The big mirror wall.
Yeah, there was some repurposing done.
Yeah.
We didn't have a huge budget.
But I loved but there was this kind of feeling of, oh, they're capturing something. Like they're not making TV, they're capturing a show. And I did like Question Everything for the first time the other night. And there's a feeling to being a performer when you've been on a few panel shows where you can tell the difference of like, there was whole chunks of that episode that we knew inside of them, this isn't going to air. There's no way this is going to air. But you don't stop. I've been on shows before where they will stop you and go like, guys, come on. And like, but it's like, no, we're doing this for the audience. Because if we stop now, the audience in the room are going to go cold. And it's that difference. I think it's like, it's good that shows like that still exist, I think, because that to me is the best type of TV, the kind of like, yeah, you're right. I've never thought about it that way. Like you don't make TV, you make a show and they put it on TV.
So I'm really fascinated by starting out again. Like, you know, as in like starting out again in like in a stand-up sense, you've toured something for 2 years. Like, and not just toured it, like it was an award-winning show. This is the other thing about this show. Like, I mean, it won the best show at the Melbourne and Sydney comedy festivals. Yes?
Yeah.
I'm right in saying that, yes?
Yeah.
And, you know, it was like kind of, I guess, like you'd been working towards this moment in a way. Like, you know, your career had been taking this trajectory, like as a stand-up. As you said, you tried on a whole bunch of things. You started very young. You tried on some things. You found your own voice and you kind of felt like you'd been working towards this moment of saying, I'm here now. Like this is, I've arrived as like one of the people who, I'm not one of the people trying to do this anymore. I'm one of the people who does this, right? And so then you've had 2 years of that. Like, you know, kind of recognized as the best thing you've done, regardless of whatever that means.
And
but,
then
you know,
someone else
like
wins those awards and no one cares anymore.
Well, I mean, of course that is true. But you have to care about what you do next. And so when you sit down with the blank page and you think about, are you touring next year? Is that like the time schedule? So where does it start? When's the first time you do like essentially what will be the show in an order? Like what's your timeline for that?
The first time, so I'm doing like a couple fringes that will be like, you know, notes on, I book in seasons now and I call it, these are my new jokes, no refunds. And that, you know, people come and watch that mess and it's great. And I really enjoy doing that. And then Melbourne Comedy Festival this year will be the first. And I think there's a bit of even kind of fun I'm having in this way, I think, where I'm doing Comedy Republic, which is I know the bookers. I am a co-owner of that. But it's 130 seats and I'm going to do the whole season. And then, you know, I'd imagine I would hope it will sell well and then we might add some kind of bigger rooms. But I wanted to like, there's something, and I don't mean this as romantic as it sounds, but like I was very lucky in the last 2 years to do my show in some quite big rooms. And I'm quite looking forward to because Melbourne, if people don't know, like you put the show together, but Melbourne's kind of one of the first like main, it's the first kind of big comedy festival, and sometimes that show is maybe not as sharp as it should be. Or like you're still developing
if they wanted it to be as sharp as, they'll have to move it to August or whatever, so we can get a little run up.
But then we'd be talking about in August. We'd be like, well, if they wanted it, they'd put it in April next year. Not good attention spans or good with deadlines.
I will say this about like the poor people of Adelaide, who over the years have seen some fucking stinkers from me, and like they've seen some good ones as well. But it does like, and I'm like, well, this is the problem with it being before Melbourne, is that like you're going to get a whole bunch of people. Like Brisbane's never seen a fucking bad show because they do it after Melbourne.
Yeah,
it's like perfect. I've like just spent a month getting it absolutely perfect. Well done, Brisbane.
Often in Adelaide walk off stage saying, I'll bring the show back when it's done. Bye. Thank you. Like it's kind of but yeah, and so I'm really looking forward to doing it. I'm doing it at 6 o'clock. I used to really romanticize the fact that I was like I'm a 9:45. I'm a dirty bird, and people are going to come. It's now, and then realizing no, I just kind of talk about my marriage. But
6 o'clock. 6 is interesting to me though, because I'm doing an early show this year as well. But it's taken me a lot longer to kind of get used to the earlier show, and part of it was dictated by my ABC audience.
Yeah,
who quite like an early show.
Yeah,
so they're not. I can still stay up late, but they can't. So,
and I think it is that kind of thing. We're realizing, and this might sound a bit douchey, but doing it a bit more on my terms that will have a nice life for me around that month as well. It's a fucking intense month, and if putting it on at 6 o'clock isn't going to affect anyone else's life, but I know that I'll be able to go out for dinner afterwards and have a nice time. I'll have a lovely show, and then I'll be able to go home or something and not be, waiting around. And it's like realizing that you can, with a bit more agency at the moment, I can make my life make a bit more sense around it and not like pray at this kind of deity of comedy and like hurting for the audience when it's like, no, they'll have a good time at 6 o'clock. They can go out for dinner too. Maybe we'll see each other at a restaurant.
I mean, in like, I think it's a great, like, I mean, it's smart. This feels really fun to me. Like, it has like great control. Like you said, you're taking like some of I think part of the thing that I sometimes think about the festival is, man, I've spent a lot of time not having fun at this festival when everybody else is having fun. Like I get to go to this really fun place every year, and by the nature of having to work so hard and never get to see anyone's shows or blah, 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 like, whereas you've done something where you're like, I could like have a really great festival, run in the show properly because, you have permission to do that in a room that size, experiment if you want to experiment, try different things, like, what's next, like all that sort of stuff, but also then make it a lifestyle decision as well.
And also feel like to be, and look, this could all crash and burn, Will, and it could be financially not good.
Everything could be, Rhys.
Yeah.
Let's be honest, like everything could be.
Oh, no, I hadn't even thought about that. What?
Mate, you owned a bar during COVID. You can't get worse.
Hey, I would say, though, the good thing about that was, may I recommend having a fully stocked commercial bar at the start of a global health crisis, and you can write yourself a little note to go check on the bar and just fill milk crates up with spirits. My head changed shape during during coronavirus because we owned a bar and just drank it all. And I'd also just bought a bunch of weed. I think it's just, I think the work will be better as well.
Yes.
Like the product will be better because I have a big fear of delivering bad stuff, or delivering, which everyone does. I know that's not but I'm almost setting it up this way to, and I was about to say to lower the expectations. It's not about that, but it's to give myself a run up for people to be able to enjoy the work. I think there's a real feeling. I've definitely done shows before that I wasn't ready to do where, you're in a big room and you've had to hide notes somewhere on the stage because the show isn't done. And it's not, the audience knows. And I want an opportunity to, and I'm not saying this I'm doing it all for the people. It's none of that bullshit. I want it to be nice for me. And I think I feel like I'm finally getting to an age and to a point where I want it to be nice for me as well as the audience.
It's funny that you've thought of that so early, though. I mean, it is part of your life. I mean, I do think that this is one of the themes that comes through in the book, is about the idea of like balancing, what you do with who you are, and like, which is interesting because you're clearly someone who is ambitious. Like you've had clear ambition, but you've managed to somehow like make space in your life for that to manifest itself in other places than just being about you and your career, it seems.
I am wildly lucky that exactly like I'm a very ambitious person, quite proudly, but I'm just very lucky that exactly what I wanted to do when I was 15 has happened.
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Yeah. No, but we used to watch the galas and all that kind of I'm insanely lucky, and I think I was having a conversation with Kyron, my husband, about this the other night, that I think I am always really interested in people that don't have a plan. Like I think it's different, and I don't know if maybe you're the same, where I had an idea of where I vaguely wanted to be, but not to no specifics. So like, like a kind of, when you first thinking of like a show, this is how I do it at least, you kind of think of like, and this sounds so douchey, but like an ethos. Like there's kind of, you might have not written a single word yet, but you can have this kind of feeling of like, I want the show to kind of feel like this. I think that's kind of how I feel about my career as a whole. Like, and now kind of more my life. Like, it's like, I kind of think I want to be here, but no, kind of like, it's the people, I think people start getting called climbers when they have a very clear point plan. And they're often the ones that I think get disappointed, because if you don't get to that, then that doesn't happen. And then you don't get to that. Whereas if you're kind of, I think you're someone who's really done this. And actually, I think it's like your generation of comic did this really well, where because there weren't as many options coming up, right? Like it was kind of this, the shape of comedy was so different. It was more kind of like, we're all working this out together, kind of. And I think that is lost a little bit now. Like people are going into it really, like my generation of comics were like this, and then the next generation are even more like this, like that kind of. I was listening to your podcast with Ann Edmonds, and you guys were talking about the kind of TikTok kind of comics. And I literally said out loud to myself, yes, when you were like talking about how they don't get that kind of camaraderie when you become big on the internet, and you're suddenly in big rooms and that sort of thing. And I think that, but they've got these kind of 10-point plans of how I'm going to get famous and how I'm going to become a big comedian. And I think lucky that I haven't really had that. I've just had like, kind of like, I think I want to be like a stand-up mostly and do this type of comedy, hopefully in the next 10 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love this. And, I love talking about these sort of things because I think they're important conversations. And I was really lucky in my generation in a lot of ways, which was that we were honestly the last generation that ran away to join the circus. Like, if anyone from my age and generation of people went into stand-up comedy because they thought it was a good way to earn a living and like build a career, then they were the ones who like are now not there. Like, I mean, there wasn't, would be an unreal, unless you considered yourself to be a futurist. I often say this to people. I'm like I didn't know. Like in retrospect, it looks like I knew, right? Like in retrospect, it looks like I had a plan. And I've even had people say to me, they're like, oh, I'd like to have a career like yours. I'm like, I don't know what it is. I don't know how it happened. I can't tell you how it happened because I don't know. But also there was that opportunity to start to move into different spaces without it being so much that there wasn't a community, right? Like now those different spaces have meant that like, yeah, you can become a really big like star and not have your own community, or your audience is your community. And that's just a different shape to, your relationship is with your audience, and they shape you and what you think's appropriate and what jokes you can make and all those sort of things in a way that I think sometimes it's when the internet comedian rises and they, there's a particularly popular internet comedian at the moment who's just done a stand-up special. And so this is the part of the industry that now I'm like, this is where I'm at in this. Some young guy comes along. I finally start to see that some other people are mad at someone. So that once people I know are mad at someone, I'm like, all right, I've got to work out what's going on here. Yeah, up until this point, I'm not engaged. But the minute that someone I know is mad about it, I've got to go, all right, I've got to find out what they're also mad about. And it's not for me, is the point. This guy is like, he's a popular internet comedian, does sort of crowd work at shows, not the sort of crowd work that I really enjoy. It's a different style to the sort of stuff that I do, but seems to be very popular.
TikTok crowd work.
Yeah, TikTok crowd work. Yeah, and I'm not a really big fan of TikTok crowd work because, like, I don't really. Anyway, whatever. That's a whole conversation for a different time. But
I'm upset. I'll just say very quick. I think at the moment there's my agents are like, we should get some like clips up of you and doing things. Whereas like I don't do crowd work. I work. I'm not saying that everyone works hard on their jokes, but I'm not very prolific. Like I do a show once or twice, like every year or two. But that show is that show, and I'm not writing too much extra on top of that. So there's not too much footage. Like as soon as I start putting clips up, it's like, well, we're allowed to do this 60 times, guys, before we have run out of stuff to say. And I remember years ago, I was doing a gig, like a big lineup show at a theater, and there was an internet comedian on, like a kind of famous one. And what was really interesting to me on the night was like all the comics, even if we didn't, some of us were really close friends and then some of us kind of didn't know each other that well, but you all kind of muck in together. You're in this shared green room and you're all doing this show together. He sat away, like he didn't know how to interact. Like he didn't know how to like get in because he didn't know any of us. And even if we tried like to kind of like, hey man, like how's the show going and blah, blah, blah. But they just kind of, it's this interesting new, and I'm not saying this in a shady way. I'm more just it just was really interesting to me.
Not right or wrong, but I do think that there is some value, and I don't mean this in a like as in this is bad or this is good, because I am absolutely don't think anything about any of those things. Like, I do think that being amongst the community can be damaging in some ways. Like everyone can start to sound the same. Everyone can make the same sort of jokes. Like you see these themes run rife like pandemics through the comedy community. You're like, why has everyone got a joke about this year? Right? And you can really kind of identify that. That's groupthink that comes out of—
Why is everyone's poster blue?
Yeah, right? Whereas these people are in isolation. So there's an argument for creativity in one way, which is that you are not soaking up these like groupthink influences of the rest. The downside is that you don't have a friend come to you at a gig one day that you're doing in front of like 14 people and going, hey, you know that like domestic violence joke that like you're opening with? Like it's not as— It's a bad joke, and it's not as— if you want it to be edgy or provocative or any of the things that you think it is, it's just not very good at that either. Like it's just not a good joke. Like subject matter aside, I mean, and it shouldn't be subject matter aside, but let's assume that you're making the greatest joke of all time in this area. You're not. And I think that when you're in a community, that stuff gets knocked off you. Whereas if you're answering to an internet algorithm and your audience is the metric, then there will be some people who absolutely do love that and respond to that. And they then become your predominant— because you kind of— that joke shakes off the people who don't like it, builds more of the people who do like it. And then if they're the only people you're getting feedback from, you just go more and more into that area rather than being influenced by your peers.
And it's like views don't equal agreement. Like, as it often, I would say, like, you know, when people— you get feedback from an audience so quickly, but online it's like— and this is a basic thought that everyone's had, but like often you look at, and we're always told, like, don't look at the comments and, like, don't read reviews and that kind of thing. Of course, like, a bunch of people do, and it's, like, toxic and that kind of thing. And I also think the softer end of that spectrum of, like, being in a community is, like, I have maybe, like, 5 very close comedy mates that we all feel comfortable enough to say, when we're all working on new stuff, to come up to each other afterwards and go, hey, just so you know, that's a little bit close to someone else's joke about that. Like, even stuff like that, like, in terms of the health of the industry. And
but that is kindness. Like, yeah. Because, there is, Pete Holmes has got a bit on his new special about, being asked if you're a robot or not. That, like, is similar enough to something I wrote in my book, that is similar enough to something that John Mulaney did in his special, but it's different. Like, it's his own take on it. Like, and I think it independently stands. It is certainly like, Pete Holmes hasn't certainly watched John Mulaney's special and read my book and gone, I'm going to write this thing. Like, that's clearly independent thought. Like, it's not, but there's a part of me that would be like, oh, that'd just carry me around, right? Like, I'd just be like, like, even somebody thinking that was the case, you'd be like, it just annoys me, right? Like, you want somebody else to go, like, hey, this sounds a bit like this, or to even just check it. Like, sometimes you're like, when a thought comes to you. So I was at work out the back of QA, and we were talking about why I hated quizzes. In the office, they do a quiz all the time, and I hate quizzes. Ooh. And because I
do you mean hard chat? Are you talking about hard chat?
Yeah, I was talking about
quiz,
Tom Gleason in particular. I was like, I hate quizzes. No, they do an office quiz, and I was like, this is my nightmare. Everyone's sitting around the office. And I was like, I'm into, like, existential questions, and then the guy I was talking to was like, you should get, like, an existential quiz book. And I said, yeah, but in the back there would only be more questions, no answers, right? Like, now, but that sounds like that would be someone else's joke. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it sounds so fully formed that you're like, I can't be the first person who's, like, thought of that, right? That's got to be a joke that's been told. I've Googled it. I've Googled a whole bunch of different variations of, like, what I can't find anything.
That's yours, baby.
But at the same time, it would be nice if someone, like, is just like, oh, no, like, Rhys told that on the show week 2, right?
Because that's the scary thing, right? Like, you just know. And I often... So a version of this I had where very early days I think I was very lucky as well that people were being very nice to me, but I was still a pretty crook comic. Like, yeah, like I said, I wanted to be Sarah Silverman. I wanted to be, but didn't have the tools to do that. And I got to the point where I started to not like my material. And I would have been like maybe 23 or something, and just started to not like, but, felt quite trapped by it. And it literally took Zoe Coombs-Marr backstage just going, and, feeling comfortable enough to say this to me, it was just going, then just stop doing it, you fucking idiot. And just having someone, and I think that's the important part of the community, of having someone be able to almost physically shake you and go, yeah, it's not good. Like, instead of, a million comments going, don't listen to them, fuck the haters. It's like, no, sometimes listen to the haters every now and then.
Yeah.
Listen to them.
I think sometimes that's great, and someone you can trust, right? Because you don't know if the internet commenter is someone you can trust, but this is someone you can trust. And to bring it back full circle to whether comedy changes anything, like, to go back to Paul F. Tompkins, because I'm always happy to talk about Paul F. Tompkins, and I'm sure that his awkwardness with you has less to do with you online and more to do with just the general way he goes about the world.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't awkward. It was more just like, I think I was being intense. And I'm sure if I met him now, I would.
He's the best. Like, he's the one greatest. Of the sweetest guys, but also an incredible comedian. But I remember this Prince thing, the $500 Prince ticket. Like, the thing I remember about that routine is that he'd managed to talk about going to see Prince for 12 minutes, and nothing had gone wrong, and nothing was shitting on anything, right?
Yeah.
Like, this wasn't a story about, I went to see Prince and here's all the disaster. Like, my storytelling of a night like that would often be around, and this is what went wrong, or I was running late. I'd add some element of, like, stakes, drama to this story, right? Like, and he didn't. He just told this, like, quite joyful story, but still hilariously funny. And even in that, like I think about that a lot when I sit down to write something for my show and I think, is this worth talking about? And then I think, you know what? Remember that night that Paul F. Tompkins told that 12-minute story about Prince and it was so good it made you go and see Prince? Like sometimes even just in the shape of your storytelling, like it might be how you are teaching someone else. And yes, the more that our friends, our colleagues, our peers can have an open conversation around us, like in the spirit of wanting to be better, right? That's what you get from your friendship group is like, we all want you to be better. Here is some advice that like might make it better for you. It's a cool thing. And it's a part of the industry that I really kind of miss being out of the scene, right? And you've done an incredible job, you and Kyron, with obviously building that community at Comedy Republic, which has been a bit of an anchor for that Melbourne scene. You've done a very smart thing, which is what I always used to like to do at the end of a night out when I was a young man, which was have a nice house so that everyone would want to come back to my house because I liked already being home. Like I was like, I'm happy for the party to continue, but I feel I can enjoy myself now that I know that at any stage I could just pop off to bed. And like I feel like Comedy Republic has obviously done that a little for the Melbourne comedy scene and a particular part of the Melbourne comedy scene. It's given it a home and an anchor so I think that's a pretty incredible thing as well, and probably great for building that community of people who can, support and challenge and, collaborate with each other.
And be a community. Like we are so proud of the fact that we've become the place that people go after another gig. Like if they've had a bar show or something, they come and have a drink at Republic. And it's like, that is so dreamy. And that's all we ever wanted, I think.
Well, Rhys, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Your book is called Dish. It is available everywhere. There's lots of it. There's copies of it everywhere. I bought it at an airport. There was a lot of them there, and I purchased it there. And I asked the woman because I just was curious and nosy. I said, she commented on what I was buying. I said, have you sold any? She goes, I've sold 3 today. So there you go.
That's nice.
I think that's
4 at least.
And it was, and I mean, I've got to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure it was a morning flight. So that's a good start to the day.
A lot of people reading about anchovy toast on a flight.
I've enjoyed the recipes, even though I'm a vegetarian. I still enjoyed.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of meat in there. Sorry about that. Shitload of meat.
A lot of descriptions of meat, the joy of meat.
A lot of wet meat.
A lot of meat talk.
Yeah. A lot of visceral meat.
Rhys, thank you so much for doing the show.
Thank you, Will.
Listener.